panel of the afternoon session. The panel today is titled Tackling the Social, Economic, and Ecological Complexity of Iowa's Water Quality Issues. My name is Peter Levi, and I assembled the panel today. I'm an assistant professor here in environmental science and policy, as well as a student ecologist. And I'm joined by our four panelists today: Bill Stowe from Des Moines Waterworks, Andrew Graham from Des Moines College, Matt Russell from Drake's Law School, and Michael Haddock from Drake University. What gets me really excited about thinking about fresh water and water quality here in Iowa is that we face some major challenges. But on the other hand, we have some incredibly creative and brilliant minds and a lot of energy here to face those challenges and to do something positive. And so we're hearing from four different disciplines this afternoon, and I'm going to ask the speakers to try to stay to 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, and 5 minutes respectively. And then I hope to open it up to a discussion for the last 30 minutes of the panel. And as I told the panelists, I hope that this doesn't become similar to last night's vice presidential debate, but if needed, I will cut you off and take you So the first speaker this afternoon will be Bill Stowe, followed by Matt Russell, then Andrew Graham and Michael Haddock.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, among the two vice presidential candidates, I think I probably look more like one than the other, but I doubt we have similar views on a number of things. I'm Bill Stowe. I'm with Des Moines Waterworks, and Peter has graciously given me a little more time than the other speakers to kind of square up on this issue that is certainly long and vital. I'll talk a little bit, particularly about the social and economic issues involving clean water. Three basic points. I'm a water producer. I represent 500,000 customers here in central Iowa that drink water from the tap, hopefully, that are produced by Des Moines Waterworks. So we represent Des Moines, and then most of our contiguous customers actually a four-county area, more or less, here in central Iowa. Point number one is we're in the public health business. This is certainly a commodity. But it's a commodity unlike any other that you purchase. It is a public health related commodity. You'll die in a few minutes without oxygen. You'll die in a few days without water. It's water that you purchase. You purchase a lot of other commodities like electricity and natural gas and telecommunications, whatever it may be. But we are a commodity imbued with extraordinary responsibilities for protecting public health. So, number one, we are a public health provider. Number two, we're a surface water provider. And many of you, like me, probably are from either small towns or farms where water comes from wells through the aquifer to the surface. That's not what we do in Des Moines in this area, and that's not what most major cities in the United States do. They're surface water providers like we are, rather than well water providers. So, again, public health provider, surface water producers, and then what's important for you to understand from an ecological perspective is water quality for surface water providers is driven by land activities, by human activities on the land within the watershed. Here, we're obviously part of the Mississippi River Valley, but we're also part of the Des Moines and Raccoon River Valley. It's more close to home. The Raccoon and Des Moines River intersect over here a few miles from us over by the foot of the state capitol, and they drain roughly upland from us 10,000 square miles of land, and the land is overwhelmingly row crop farming. That row crop farming has a significant implication on water quality, and we'll see if I can do this through line of sight. Normally in a longer presentation, I talk about agricultural accountability because that's really what we're talking about. My whole gig really comes down to three words: source water protection. And source for us is, again, surface water protection. So a little bit different if we were drawing from the aquifer. Source water protection is what we're about. Agriculture is what drives surface water quality for us. This is where most of us think Iowa is emotionally, psychological. This beautiful state of the state capitol, first in the nation in the presidential selection process, but we, from an economic standpoint, are megafauna in terms of our agricultural production. We're first in corn, generally first in soybeans. Sometimes our neighbors in Illinois and us battle for that. First in hogs and first in eggs, but there's a consequence from that. There are great economic benefits from that, but there is an environmental consequence from it. And this is an example of one of the environmental consequences from that. This is an area just to the north of us here, a small reservoir, where you see blue-green algae. Blue-green algae is increasingly an important issue for us in the surface water treatment business because we thought just a few years ago that was a Great Lakes phenomenon, something you hear about on Lake Erie, Lake Huron, occasionally Michigan, occasionally Superior. But now we're finding it here in the central Iowa. This blue-green algae creates a toxin that's extraordinarily difficult for us to treat as surface water providers. And you can tell, you should be able to tell, that an extremely important issue to us is overnutrification in surface waters, too many nutrients. Nutrients, as their name implies, are fertilizers in industrial agriculture, particularly nitrogen, particularly phosphorus. This plume, this blue-green plume, is created because the water is warm enough and there are so many nutrients in there that an algae, a bacteria, create a toxin that's very difficult to deal with. And you see from our friends at Iowa State University, the primary cause for too many nutrients in our water is from soybean farming upriver from us in the Wine-Rack River valleys. I want to talk a little bit about the economic and social issue associated with clean water. We believe at the One Waterworks that our customer demand here, our customer responsibility is to go to safe, affordable, and abundant drinking water. It is a human right. We view also with our friends at the United Nations to have safe and affordable access to drinking water, whether we're talking about Flint, Michigan, or Des Moines, Iowa, or Southern California, Orange County, California. Issues of water security that are extraordinarily important and ones you're going to hear more about. We believe also that we're in a water crisis, and I tend not to use the term crisis very often because it's like war and battle in our society. It's overused. When I misplace my car keys, if I were to misplace my pointer here, it's not a crisis. It's an inconvenience, maybe an embarrassment, but a crisis really goes to something that involves human health and safety. And we believe we're at that point with surface water quality in the state. To several indicia here that are pretty important to us in reaching that conclusion. First, this year alone, in 2016, we've had a record number of beach advisories. So the DNR, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, concludes that human contact with surface waters in the state and beaches is not advised. We don't close down beaches in the state like some of you may see if you go to Chicagoland or wherever, but it literally close the beach down. We'll advise people, the DNR will advise people not to use the beaches. Generally, that's because of too much bacteria. We've had a record number of closures there, and I want to emphasize to this crowd as I look around, you may not be people who regularly use beaches in Iowa. You may be like me and go to Nantucket or go to the Ontario Street Beach in Chicago, whatever it may be, but a lot of the folks who I work for, particularly in the city of Des Moines, don't have the resources to be able to do that. And they go to Grace Lake, and they go to Saylorville. When beaches are closed down, we have literally cut them off from a recreation and social resource that we can find substitutes for that many of our customers cannot. 75% of the public school students in Des Moines get free and subsidized lunches. So we have a huge social economic issue associated with water and availability of a basic human right here. It's frankly a little different than some of the suburbs that I work for that are far more affluent and don't tend to be terribly concerned about these issues. Another crisis element from our vantage, record number of impaired waterways. I'm sure most of you understand the basic premise. The U.S. EPA requires states to determine, using public health criteria, what waters are not essentially fishable or swimmable. The number of those reaches in Iowa is at a record high number. It was last assessed in 2015. It will be assessed again in 2017. But from 13 to 15, that is 2013 to 2015, the number of those reaches went up 15% to a high. be an increasing number of stretches of our surface waters that are just not safe. We also, in my business, to make this drinkable and safe for you, had to denitrify basically half the days last year. Our prior record before that, denitrification, won't get into the valence electron chemistry ion exchange part of that because that's a whole big discussion. But basic water treatment does not take nutrients out of water. It takes suspended soils out. It deals well with microbacterial issues and other issues that can involve human health. But when it comes down to nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen in particular, traditional treatment doesn't work. We have to do something different. We had to do something different half the days last year, which is a new record, not a record that we would want to set again. And you all know that the hypoxic area, the days in the Gulf of Mexico, unfortunately continues to grow. A huge issue for our friends in the Gulf. And I'll mention again, just quickly, this idea of blue-green algae. A year ago, I and my staff were very focused on nitrate concentrations and the risks associated with that. We've had a little relief this year from that. Not, I don't believe, because of conservation practices and great things that are happening on the river, but because it's been a wetter year. And the solution to pollution is dilution. My generation, remember that when it's wet, we dilute out a lot of nitrate by concentration. We increase the loadings that go to the Gulf of Mexico, but because it's wet, we get some relief. We have not had relief from mycotoxins and blue-green algae. That is far more of a concern for us in 2016 than we've ever had before. It's generally unregulated. The science is untested. The treatment processes necessary to make it safe for you are ones that, frankly, we and our peers across the country are struggling to meet. We've met and exceeded them, but realistically, they're a huge concern for us. Our hydrogeology here in Central Iowa is very different. We have a lot of tiling in the area called the Des Moines Lobe. That's the blue and the green areas you see upriver from us. Glaciation happened about 15,000 years ago, which by geological time is a nanosecond ago. Not long ago, glaciation coming down through Canada, through Minnesota, bringing rich soils to our area of the Midwest and certainly our area of the state, but created prairie potholes and marshes. That's the natural phenomenon that should be in the Des Moines, Iraqi, River valleys. And unfortunately, it's not the case. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's not the case. Those areas have been tidal. They've been artificially drained. Far more likely that you're going to see artificial drainage and the consequences from that in our area of the state than in any other area of the state. That's creating some interesting dynamics for us. I'll just stop with this one. This is a picture of drainage tile. In the lower left corner, you see emerging corn and beautiful black soil about the height of your seats. That is about a meter from the surface of the land to about a meter beneath it. Generally on 10 by 10 centers, there's flexible tile like this that keeps this area from reverting to a swamp, a bog, the natural circumstances of the Des Moines Lobe. It laterally moves the water away from the natural filtration of the soil mantle going down to the aquifer and brings a quantity of water and low quality of water to us. Unfortunately, in Iowa, these kinds of discharges are unregulated. That's a huge concern for us. As we're talking about the storm sewer system, we're talking about a wastewater treatment plant or a water treatment plant. When a pipe goes to the rivers, the waters of the state or the waters of the U.S. is regulated. Not in Iowa if it comes out of agricultural fields. A lot of drainage tiling in our area and a few other areas in the United States. We're unique. I just show you that to give you a sense of that. Great indication from Illinois about what drainage systems look like. You see ammonia, generally probably in the form of animal manure put on a field, converted to nitrate and then being mainlined with water into the surface waters of the state into a drainage ditch, as it's called. Very artificial and creating significant water quality and quantity problems for us downstream. These are where the drainage districts are in Iowa, almost all of them in our watersheds. If you live in Johnson County, if you live in Poweshiek County, if you live in Potawatomi County, if you live in Fayette County, you don't even know what a drainage district is, but very important with the drainage systems here in central Iowa that affect surface water quality. Nitrate, I'll just touch on. heavily regulated as it should be. Some dispute coming now from industrial agriculture, oh, that's an unrealistic limit. That limit's been there for a number of years. It's peer reviewed through a science process that brings us a public health concern. People who want to change that are people who are playing with public health standard. As a water producer, you just tell me what the regulation is and somehow we'll reach it. The current regulation is 10 parts per million. The risk group is generally the very young. There's emerging science now. The environmental working group here in Iowa has just come out with a working paper that points to other risk groups, all of us in terms of cancer and other concerns associated with nitrates. A little different risk group, highly regulated, and one that creates huge concerns to us in this area because our rivers are often 2 or 3 times the allowable drinking water level, so we're having to denitrify. That's how we denitrify. I won't get into it very much because I'm confident I'm pretty much past my time. We've had the world's largest nitrate removal facility for almost 25 years. It's kind of like bragging to doing the biggest chain smoker in the room. It may be a fact, but it's not particularly charming. It's a reality, and that's another public health risk. That we have to be in an area of the United States that has such a thing. Those are days above the axis in which the nitrate concentrations in either rivers or 10 parts per million. You'll see some years where it's almost 0. That is, there are days when we're not at 10. Those are flood years, where again it's diluted out. Concentration is low, but the loadings and the amount of mass that ultimately makes it to the Gulf are high, unfortunately. I will again get one more time on this blue-green algae situation. That's Toledo, Ohio. A few years ago, they lost their drinking water supply because of this blue-green algae and its impacts. It is our current concern, and it's an unregulated concern. It's one that we're big enough to be able to test and determine. Unfortunately, not a lot of other communities are not. That, I think, is enough for now, other than to give you this great picture from beautiful Sac County, Iowa. You think that's natural hydrology? Wow. Think again, very artificial rain, creating again significant concerns about the quantity and quality of water that are coming to us. No other business in the state can do something like that and be unregulated. If that were a municipal storm sewer system, if that were attached to a manufacturing facility other than agriculture, they would have to have a permit for discharge like that. Unfortunately, that's not the case here in Iowa, and we view that as a huge concern. Not for now, Peter. I think I'm way past that. I'll pass it to Tom.
Thanks for that great overview, Bill. Next, we'd like to welcome Matt Russell to the podium. He's the Resilient Agriculture Coordinator here at Drake University in the law school.
And I'm just going to stay seated to save a little time. So what Bill talked about was particularly his problem with cleaning up water for the city of Des Moines, the greater Des Moines area. And really, that's a problem that's not just isolated to the Des Moines lobe. It's in the United States, it's all over the places, and globally, we've got challenges with water quality. I think one of the arguments is that water quality has improved. And I think in some ways that is the case, because if you go back 100 years, and we know that people were getting sick from drinking water out of wells and other things because we didn't understand. So we've certainly improved water quality in some ways because we've built better infrastructure. But I think if you look at public health, that's kind of like saying, well, public health is in great shape because we're healthier than we were before, we've got nothing, no work to do. In fact, we've got a lot of work to do with water quality because we know more, we have the ability to do more, we have a greater responsibility. And so then understanding those trends that we do see, in fact, when it comes to nutrients, we aren't making a great deal of improvement, and we're going to have to. So a couple of things. I think to understand the debate or to understand where the opportunities are for improving the situation, we don't really have a policy crisis. We've got the political infrastructure, the policies, the jurisdictions. We've got things in place that we can solve this problem. So it's not like we can't solve the problem because we don't have the right jurisdictions, policies, the ability to govern to fix the problem. And I don't think it's a resource problem. We have a tremendous amount of wealth. Agriculture is very productive. We're going through a downturn right now, whether it's just a correction or it's a crisis, but clearly there's a significant downturn in the ag economy in Iowa. But if you look at the big picture, we have a lot of resources. And I don't think it's a problem with innovation. Like, it's not a technical problem. We have precision agriculture. We have a tremendous amount of things, practices, innovations, techniques, and those things are developing over time. We've got the ability to solve the problem. Where we have the inability is the politics. We can't seem to be able to figure out how to put these resources, the governance, the resources, the innovations, put them together to solve the problem. And as we know more, and that bar in some ways goes down, right? We don't want to hit this bar. As we know more, we want water quality to always improve. It's a trajectory as opposed to just Bill has a limit. He's got to hit 10 parts per million. That's a bright line. But when we think as a society, and as a state, as a nation, as a global community, how do we fix this? How do we address it? It's not a bar. It's a moving target because we want to get better all the time. And that's public health, that's agriculture, that's what we do as humans. So we've got a political problem. And we have an attitudinal problem. And in some ways we do have an economic problem. And specifically right now, the economic problem for agriculture in Iowa is nitrates are the problem, nitrogen fertilizer, huge source of that problem. And we have new nitrogen fertilizer plants coming online, 5 or 6 of them here in the United States. We haven't built many of them in years. So at the time we need to use less nitrogen, the cost of nitrogen is going to be going down, and the supply is going to be exploding, and we're going to be telling farmers, use less nitrogen, but the economics are going to be saying, use more nitrogen. And so we do have while we don't have necessarily a resource problem, we have a lot of resources to fix the problem, we do have an economic problem with incentives. So how are we going to pull that together? And I see some real promising things. And if you look, Chesapeake Bay, Great Lakes, hypoxia in the Gulf, and now emerging climate change, lots of things going on out there. But the Des Moines Waterworks lawsuit brought things home right here. So in many ways, there's a lot of reaction to that lawsuit, but one thing you can say about the lawsuit is it has gotten people's attention. And so we're starting to look at the jurisdictions and policy, we're starting to look at the resources, we're starting to look at the practices and innovations, and trying to figure out how to put those together. And it's creating a bit of a political problem for folks. People have differing attitudes of frustration with that, and then it's highlighting some of the economics. So I'll leave it with that, and we can have a further discussion.
Thank you, Matt. That was a good summary of the policy issues. So next we have Andrew Graham, who's an environmental chemist at Grinnell University, Grinnell College, to talk about the ecological and environmental side.
So what I'd like to do is talk about some of the other things that are in our water, aside from nitrate, and if Bill talked a little bit about algal derived toxins. And so I'm going to give you kind of 2 examples of some other challenges to water quality in the state of Iowa, that, one of which is very much related to the problem of nitrogen and algal toxins, and the other of which is a global problem. So we'll start with the global problem. I think that many folks are aware of fish consumption advisories particularly for women who are pregnant or may be pregnant in the near future. There are recommended daily intakes of certain kinds of large predatory fish like shark, and tuna, and swordfish, but also locally things like largemouth bass or walleye. And one thing that you might not know, and I didn't really fully appreciate until I moved to Iowa, is that the upper Midwest, or really, I guess really the lower Midwest, is kind of a hot spot for mercury deposition. And that mercury is mostly, turns out, sourced from burning coal in Asia, primarily. And that mercury has a relatively long, what's called residence time in the atmosphere, meaning that that mercury that's emitted stays in the atmosphere for about a year before it's ultimately deposited. And what that means is that although we've had some improvements in the United States in reducing mercury emissions, mostly fortuitously related to trying to control sulfur emissions and reduce the problem of acid rain, we've not seen in this part of the country decreases in mercury emissions. And in fact, what's shown on this lower plot down here is because I don't have a pointer, but I wanted to contrast for you what's happened in our part of the world. So this is a station that monitors mercury concentrations in rainfall in Nebraska, and you can see that concentrations have either remained flat or perhaps increased somewhat over the last 8 or 9 years compared to what's happening in the eastern part of the country where concentrations have been declining. And the reason that this is a problem is that ultimately that mercury that rains out of the atmosphere is deposited into aquatic ecosystems, and there are a variety of microorganisms that can do what's called methylating the mercury. And that methyl mercury that's produced is really bioaccumulative, and that's why we have these fish consumption advisories related to mercury. And so you can see here, this is for the year 2015 from the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. These are everywhere where a fish consumption advisory has been issued related to mercury. And these are places where it's not recommended that you eat more than 1 meal per week of fish. Generally, these are done on the basis of monitoring largemouth bass. And there were 2 points that I wanted to raise that kind of tie into some of what Matt was talking about political will to get things done and kind of the political climate that influences environmental management. The first is that we have in the state of Iowa, this is not meant as a dig at the folks that work hard at the IDNR, but we have a very, very spotty monitoring program for mercury in fish. If you look at our neighbors to the north in Minnesota and Wisconsin, much more aggressive monitoring for mercury in fish. And we have, I think, every reason to believe that those problems are every bit as prevalent here as they are to the north. And then the second thing is that it turns out that in Iowa we actually have a more relaxed trigger for when fish consumption advisories get issued. So here in Iowa it's 0.3 parts per million at which a fish advisory gets issued. Further north it's 0.1 or 0.2 depending on how often the fish is consumed. So something to be aware of. The last thing I wanted to talk about just briefly as a chemist was to throw lots of names of chemicals at you. Perhaps some of you have heard about the estrogenic activity of wastewaters. So essentially the idea is that when as humans we consume lots of pharmaceuticals, we use lots of other biologically active products in our daily life, and when we go to the bathroom or take a shower or do our laundry, those chemicals are discharged to wastewater. And the challenge here is that we have lots and lots of different kinds of chemicals, ranging from surfactants, ingredients in soaps, to antibiotics like triclosan, which is now going to be banned finally in household soaps. Pharmaceuticals like anticonvulsants, antidepressants, NSAIDs, steroids derived from birth control, and then we have a whole slew of agriculturally derived contaminants, herbicides, things called herbicide safeners, which are actually not all that different than the herbicides themselves, and then these steroidal animal growth promoters. And so the challenge is, again, that we have lots and lots of these chemicals, many at relatively low concentrations, nanograms per liter. And how do we, it's actually very difficult to measure most of these chemicals, and we need different methods for different classes of chemicals. And many of these chemicals are persistent after wastewater treatment. Transformation products of these compounds, either degradation in wastewater treatment or when that water eventually makes it into a surface water drinking water treatment plant, we can generate transformation products during the treatment of the drinking water. And a number of these chemicals are endocrine disruptors. And sort of the bottom line is that we don't really have a very good handle on what is the risk to human health, and importantly also, I think, wildlife, to this whole slew of chemicals that we are introducing into the environment. So I will stop there and take questions if you have time.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Our fourth panelist, before we get to those questions, is Michael Haddock. He's a sociologist here at Drake University in the College of Arts and Sciences.
Thanks, Peter. And I'm honored to be on a panel with so many people that have studied this issue so deeply. As Peter mentioned, I'm a sociologist, and so I'm going to approach the issue of water quality as a sociologist. And I want to focus particularly on the political questions that Matt mentioned in his talk. So what I would like to focus on in particular today is the way that water quality issue is, water quality is framed or it's defined in political conversations, and particularly in the way that it's framed as an urban versus a rural issue. An issue that pits rural areas and urban areas against one another. And I think there are many examples of this. One example, of course, is Governor Granstad's comment last year about the Des Moines Water Works lawsuit, where he said that Des Moines has declared war on rural Iowa, or at least that was the headline in the Des Moines Register, characterizing the speech. And as a sociologist, I find this puzzling. One of the reasons I find it puzzling is that the Des Moines Water Works, if I'm correct, and correct me if I'm not, please, but the Des Moines Water Works doesn't provide water only to urban customers. It also provides water to rural customers. So it's not purely an urban institution. And there's a list of those rural water customers on the website of the Des Moines Water Works. And of course, there's a larger issue, which Bill Stowe explained, which is that water quality is not simply an urban issue. It's an issue that everybody has a stake in, rural areas and urban areas alike. But the rural versus urban frame, I think, is intuitively appealing, and it's difficult to sort of get out of. It's almost a trap. It shapes political conversations. And what I want to do today is talk a little bit about why that is, and why, in spite of this evidence to the contrary, people sort of reach for that frame as common sense. And I will say that unlike many of the others on this panel, this is not something that I've studied very closely. So my ideas here are meant to sort of frame a conversation, but not to sort of give the final word or final explanation for this phenomenon. So I want to start sort of with a very broad sociological idea, and that's the idea of culture. For sociologists, culture is often understood as a collection of symbols and beliefs and understandings that we use to orient ourselves to the world. And one of the ways that we do this is through the construction of categories. So we lump things in the world into categories. People, are male or female, black or white, young or old, spaces are rural or urban. I like to think of this as kind of a cultural shorthand. It enables us to make sense of things, but it also simplifies the world. And one of the big problems with this is that it conceals the fact that most things don't fit easily into one category or another. So we can easily mistake the categories or the frameworks that we use to understand things for reality, the things that we're actually trying to understand. And another problem with categorization of this kind is that it gives rise to stereotypes. So categories are like magnets that attract other cultural meanings. And these meanings shape people's beliefs about the contents of the categories, often in ways that don't really resemble reality. For example, there's a team of sociologists that's written about the stereotypes that are associated with rural areas in US popular culture. They use a term, and the term is urban normativity. And what they mean is that urban areas are often portrayed as normal in popular culture, while rural areas are often portrayed as abnormal. So urban areas are portrayed as progressive, rural areas as backward, urban people are portrayed as sophisticated, rural people as simple, not accurate, but a theme in popular culture. If you watch reality TV, you can think of plenty of examples of this. Duck Dynasty, Here Comes Honey Boo Boo, Amish in the City, it's very easy to do. But on the other hand, there are also counter-stereotypes directed toward urban areas. Urban people are often described as out of touch, as self-centered, as arrogant. And the framing of water quality as the rural versus urban issue fits into this broader cultural pattern that defines rural and urban areas as number one, different, and number two, antagonistic. So this frame is out there in culture. It's very easy to grab it and apply it to this issue, even though the issue it is more complex than the frame it's on. Now, there are material tensions and inequalities between rural and urban areas, and I don't want to minimize those. So many rural areas are suffering economically, and economic problems are often perceived to be tied up in relationships with urban areas. So whether it's out-migration of people and businesses from rural areas, or the siting of environmentally hazardous operations in rural areas, or relationships of financial dependency on urban banks and markets, interactions between rural and urban areas are often seen to bring uneven costs and benefits. But as the case of the Des Moines Water Works suggests, rural-urban relationships are complex, and many issues don't fit easily into an us versus them framework. But that feature of those issues is difficult to articulate, and it's often difficult to comprehend. And I would add that participants in discussions about water quality have often seized on and amplified the sort of rural versus urban frame that characterizes the debate. And in my opinion, I think this is detrimental to actual progress on the issue. And I think this is part of what Matt was pointing to in his presentation. So to take only one example, and this is only one of many examples, last month the Iowa Farm Bureau Federation offered to pay for the defense of, quote, farmers and rural citizens against, quote, the urban lawsuit brought by the Des Moines Water Works. As I said, it's a simplification to treat the waterworks as purely an urban institution, which is what this quote suggests. But it's also a simplification to lump farmers and rural citizens together. Not all farm owners live in rural areas, nor are the interests of all rural citizens necessarily aligned with those of all farmers, nor, as Bill Stowe pointed out, do all farmers have the same stake or interests in regulation of drainage canals. So there's a saying in sociology, if people believe something is real, it often has real consequences. And I want to conclude by just mentioning one of the consequences that I see of this framing, this rural versus urban framing of water quality issues. One consequence or one effect, sadly, I think, is ongoing conflict. So an understanding that presents victory for one side as a loss for the other side is not likely to lead to cooperation. And I think that without cooperation of one kind or another, whether enforced or voluntary, it's unlikely that progress will be made on water quality issues. So as we talk about water quality in Iowa and the complexities of water quality, I think one of the important things, if not the most important thing we want to consider, is the framing of the issue itself and how it can be framed in ways that encourage cooperation, even though given cultural patterns, it can be more difficult to do that than to sort of rely on framings that emphasize antagonism and difference between rural and urban areas. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Michael. So thank you, panelists, for those words. I think it's really great that we're able to assemble such a diverse group of panelists here for this issue. And so we'd like to have a discussion for about 20 minutes here. I guess I'll kick it off, and then if there's questions in the audience, please just raise your hand and I'll run around with the microphone. But I just wanted to ask each of you, you're coming at this idea and this perspective of water quality issues from different disciplines. And as a relatively new Iowan, having just moved here in January of this year, what's really impressed me about the state is I love that this feels like a really big, small town. In that no matter where you go in Iowa, you see somebody you know, you hear issues that hit home to you. And so we all know that there's issues with water quality in Iowa. What do you see as the one bridge that we really need to build in order to tackle those issues? You all mentioned different bridges, the rural-urban bridge, the political lack of a bridge, the ecological bridge, and Bill mentioned several bridges. If you have an idea, now that you've heard the other panelists as well, what do you foresee as if you were to narrow it down to one bridge?
Peter, great question, and I think one that forces us to kind of synthesize our own views down to a clear theme, and the clear theme for me as a water producer, and again, a provider of public health commodities, public health. Public health is no less valuable in rural areas than it is in urban areas. It's no less valuable in Polk County than it is in Sac County and other counties that we pursued in our process. Water, the dimension that I'm talking about from a social and economic standpoint, I'm talking about the recreational benefits of having our surface waters look more like Minnesota or more like Wisconsin. There's some folks in the audience who are river advocates, as an example. I'm talking about it purely from a public health standpoint of the difficulty in making this a commodity that's safe, affordable, and abundant to you as a consumer. So from our vantage, that is the dimension, the bridge, if you will, that we are focusing on, because we believe that out of that should come a consensus around science, around good public policy, and around the future of Iowa. Right now, the folks who we are looking at as major economic dynamos in central Iowa are not the people who were the entities that I grew up as a central Iowan thinking about, John Deere and Firestone, not even a principal. But they're people like Microsoft and Google and Facebook who use water not for human consumption, but for cooling purposes of server farms, as an example. The point being that we have to think differently. We have to think about evolving science, the science of determining what public health standards are, and continues to improve. At the same time, we see industrial agriculture resorting to methods of increasing productivity that by their very nature are unsafe towards public health.
Great. And it is a public health conference, so it means.
Well, the bridge I think that we get to is a really big one. And the sooner we get to it, the better. And looking at the agriculture community is, some really significant shifts in the last 5 years are, one, the agriculture community is stepping up and instead of saying there's no problem, acknowledging that there's a problem. I mean, the Iowa Soybean Association is a good example of being able to take some political risks and signing on to supporting the Iowa campaign and the sales tax increase for water quality so I think that's changed. But they're also, they also say, oh, it's a really big problem, it's going to take time. Well, we need to get to it then, right away. Like, it's going to take a lot of time, but we don't want to wait. The really big bridge is climate change. And unfortunately, we've done a really good job in agriculture of organizing farmers to be some of the biggest, one of the biggest, most significant blocks of climate change deniers in the country. And that's really to our detriment. I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, agriculture, and Iowa agriculture was kind of leading globally on thinking about carbon sequestration and answers like agriculture being a solution to climate change. We did a lot of backpedaling and built a lot of really unhelpful walls that we're trying to dismantle, or some folks are still trying to build those, but this understanding that climate change is a big global concern, that also means that we're probably going to monetize carbon, and there's probably going to be a lot of resources around it. And when we address carbon, we address emissions and climate change, and carbon sequestration, and soil health, and water quality, we have the ability to do it all using the public policies that we have in place, the infrastructure. We can lead the globe in the most productive agricultural part of the world in figuring out how to solve so many problems and use the resources that are going to be available around climate change and the monetization of carbon. So that's the big bridge, and it's going to take more than agriculture, and it's going to take public health and agriculture and public policy and people in the arts to figure out how to tell the story and move us. So it really is cross-cultural. It's a problem that the whole globe is facing. Some parts of the globe are facing it more significantly than others, but it is something that we're all in together, that we're going to be able to solve together, and we are so able to lead that here in Iowa if we put together the political will to do it.
Yeah, we talked a lot about water quality today. We didn't touch on water quantity, which is going to be changing as we see in northeastern Iowa just last weekend. So we'll start with one question here.
Thank you, panelists. So much to think about. So one concept or thought around reframing this, for me, is clean water is critical to economic development. You can't have one without the other. But I don't see that being talked about in the public at large, although it's touched on here. The question I have is, Iowa can't be the only state dealing with this issue. So I want to know what's happening either across the Mississippi or across the Missouri or in other areas of the United States, and are these potential allies or collaborators around solving the big problem?
I can speak briefly about what's happened in the Chesapeake, and folks can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. The Chesapeake is, a multi-state region, and there are sources of nutrient pollution coming from all of those states. And the real challenge there has been to politically organize those states to get them to cooperate, and that Delaware doesn't want to impose regulations if it's going to put their farmers at a competitive disadvantage to Maryland. And so far they've really relied on mostly voluntary reductions on the part of agriculture, and then have made really deep cuts in limiting nutrient pollution derived from municipal wastewater. And the bottom line is it's not working. And there's a whole variety of reasons for that, but I think that one thought that occurred to me is the necessity of multi-state cooperation in fixing this problem on a national scale. And I don't know that you do that without intervention at the federal policy level.
And what I briefly chime into that too, so I can chime a little bit, is that Iowa, as a scientist with water quality issues, we view Iowa as an outlier. So in a way, before I got the job here at Drake, all the stream ecologists I ever talked to at national meetings knew Iowa and knew the Raccoon River specifically as the high nitrate river if you want to study high nitrate rivers. So in a way, Iowa is unique, but it is important to turn to other neighbors and other areas where this is a concern. So that's what I chip into that.
This question is for skills though. In your talk, you showed the drainage towers. So one solution would be to get rid of the drainage towers. But then those farmers, their livelihoods would be damaged or negatively impacted. So where's the balance?
We have never advocated, nor would we, for the removal of drainage tile systems. They're too endemic to our socioeconomic life in north central Iowa. I mean, it's a critical part of what keeps us from being a big wetland. You and I may argue it might be nice to have big wetland, but we certainly aren't there. We've got billions of dollars in investment and billions of dollars in economic output coming from a system. The problem is the system is unregulated. As somebody in the science world, you give me a pipe and I'll give you a way to regulate from what comes out of that pipe. In our current voluntary system, we've got pipes that are unregulated, and so all they're looking at is draining that land for corn production, basically, as opposed to looking at the implications of what that unregulated drainage does to those of us who live downstream. So the long and short answer to your question is we're not favoring, nor would we favor ending the drainage districts or removing drainage tile. What we are asking for is the effluent coming out of those systems be regulated like a municipal storm sewer system or like a drinking water plant. They're discharging pollutants into the waters of the United States that should be regulated. Great, kind of discussion about where we are as a region and why Iowa is different, and that Iowa is very different. I tell folks when I speak, and I speak relatively often outside of Iowa on this issue, that I'm from Iowa, IOWA, Iowa Wildlife Ecology. We have decimated our natural ecology in this state for things like row crop agriculture. I don't think we can turn that clock back effectively, but we can deal with the consequences a whole hell of a lot better than we are. Our friends in Wisconsin and Minnesota is an example where there is a significant economic interest associated with recreational use of surface waters, have a far different idea about putting cattle into a stream. I went to school in Madison. That would be fighting words for most Wisconsiners, including those who are part of a very, very successful dairy farming world who wouldn't think of doing that. We need to change what our expectations are as islands, not as urban islands or suburban islands, or not as Roman Catholic islands, whatever kind of split we want to put in this. We're all water consumers, and we as a society, as a state, fail to ask basic questions about environmental and ecological accountability. We think that there should be a free pass for industrial agriculture. Agriculture is not a monolith. I will also feel the need to say that. Great local foods folks, great organic foods folks, there's great small farming that's going on right now. It's industrial agriculture that's following a model that's failing, if it's not failing. Unfortunately, we're beginning to see very much on the ecological side, from the water quality side, the implications of that. And we talk in generalities about whether water quality is improving or not. The reality is the science is improving in a way that's showing us that things that I would have done 30 years ago are no longer acceptable because of public health standards and shouldn't be acceptable now that we have greater knowledge.
We have about 5 more minutes. I saw 2 more questions.
There are a host of agricultural practices that can be employed that aren't being employed, that aren't as expensive or draconian as tearing up the tiles. So cover crops are a good example of that. If we put 14 million acres of cover crops and did it at best practices at a really high level, we would make a significant impact on improving water quality in the state. But at about $30 an acre, at a time when the cost of corn production is essentially higher than the value of the corn coming off those acres, that's an economic problem. But that's no excuse, right? That's no excuse to say, well, we can't do it. How do we get to 14 million acres of cover crops? That's the question that has to be answered. And I think part of what we can all do is help agriculture realize that we need to solve that problem. And I'm part of agriculture, and they have a farm, we grew up on a farm. We've got to figure out how to do that, and dragging our feet is no excuse.
Right, we'll take 2 more questions here.
This may be bigger than what we want to tackle here, but I just want to point out a theme that I'm seeing in this panel, in the plenary session this morning, in many of the posters that I was looking at, and that is, I think the bridge we need to be working on is, what is this relationship between economics and health? And so often the two are working against each other, whether we're talking about, it's in the farm's interest to sell more of these opiates, and it's in our interest to not use them, whether it's fertilizer. So I don't know if anyone has a comment on how we tackle that.
Yeah, I would just comment that we don't, economists would call all of what you're talking about the externalities of the products, and we don't price them, whether it's talking about carbon. We don't price the environmental impacts of carbon pollution. We don't price the environmental impacts of nitrogen pollution. Well, we sort of do, in that consumers have to pony up some money to pay for denitrification. We don't price the environmental impacts of herbicides or pesticides or pharmaceuticals. So I think you're right that we have to find a way to embed those prices into those products.
Can I take it one step further in this regard? Not only do we not price it, we distort the system. We have USDA systems that encourage people to plant in the wrong areas. We do nothing to tie the receipt of public funds to conservation practices. So not only do we not price, we distort the system. And we wonder why we don't have sustainable agriculture, because we don't have an equilibrium reached between benefits and costs.
And on the point of economics, one of the reasons we don't have 14 million acres of cover crops in Iowa is because there's not enough seed to plant 14 million acres of cover crop in Iowa. And so there is a need to build, and it's starting to happen, but we can certainly accelerate that. There's a whole industry that needs to be built around new and innovative agricultural practices. And to your point, we're not incentivizing those. We still have a lot of incentives for an agricultural system that needs to be changed and adjusted, and we need longer rotations. Well, one of those rotations could be actually growing crops for cover crops, the seed. So there is an economic benefit. If we get serious about climate change, there is a tremendous economic benefit to growth around different fuels and energy and soil health. But we have to have the political will, we have to have the attitude to do that, and we're struggling to get there.
Just so you hear from all of us. I think that one of the things that I was trying to mention in my talk was that oftentimes the economic interests of rural areas and the economic interests of the agricultural industry are seen as one and the same, but that's not necessarily true. And I think that if they are seen as one and the same, it creates an obstacle for these conversations, because it's hard to imagine how changes of the magnitude that people are talking about can take place in the practice of agriculture itself without having some effects on the fortunes of people who are in that industry. And that's not unlike other industries that are facing changes. But that does not necessarily mean that rural communities will experience those effects in the same way, nor must they experience those effects in the same way. So I think that part of the conversation really should be about disaggregating or separating the effects for agriculture from the effects for rural communities, and not sort of conflating those two or blending those two when they don't need to be, and in reality they may not be together, connected in that way.
We could surely talk all afternoon about this subject, but I did want to, okay, thank you for taking that. So we'll wrap it up. I believe that the panelists will be here at least briefly afterwards, so please join me in thanking them for the wonderful work.